All right, this is part 4 of lecture 1 of state and local public finance. So let's move on from the revenue side, which is where we generate all of the money that we need for state and local governments, over to the spending side of things. So here is a chart that shows you the state and local expenditures kind of all combined together. And you can still get the separated state or local separate expenditures in this data set as well. But since we already went through the separate revenue sources, I decided to just combine all of these together for the expenditure side. So you can see that the total is about $49 billion in terms of state and local expenditures. And the majority of this, about half of all of the expenditures, basically go towards education and social services. Those are your green pieces of the pie, 30% and 20% here. Education includes anywhere from your K through 12 education, adult education, to your higher education expenditures are all in that green chunk over there. And then in your social services, that orange 20.75% piece of the pie, that includes most of what is considered to be public welfare, so things like cash assistant payments. It includes things like food stamp programs. It includes hospitals, social insurance administration, veteran services. All of those are provided as part of that social services expenditure. So a couple of other pieces in here, that insurance trust, 13.63% component, that is again the same thing as the insurance trust revenue side. So those are the revenue and expenditure streams that are directly tied to each other and cannot be interchangeably used with other categories of state local expenditures. So anything else that's interesting here? Let's see. So public safety includes your police and other public safety agencies in there. Transportation, that's the lighter green 6.21 category here. Those include, the majority of that goes towards highway maintenance, road maintenance. It also includes air transportation and also other types of ports, parking, sea, if there are seaports or inland ports, those types of things. In the environment and housing category, that's this blue pie piece here, 7.42%. It's kind of interesting that the environment and housing are kind of combined as one larger expenditure category for state and local spending. So it includes not only your natural resource preservation, conservation, restoration. It includes money that's spent towards parks and recreation, but it also includes a separate piece for housing and community development. So, so if there's any money spent towards providing for low-income housing or housing assistance, those are going to fall into this particular category. There's also sewage payments, solid waste management. Those are also part of this environment and housing category. So it's a little bit of a more catch-all than not. We also have our utilities, it's the 5.71%, and then a very small piece of expenditure going towards running those liquor stores that Oregon governs at the state level. Okay, so moving on to the education piece in here. So in Oregon, since education is one of the largest state and local spending pieces, I wanted to break that out a little bit because you guys are also in higher education. So, so this would be a little bit kind of interesting for us to take a closer look at. And you can see that there's 38% of the pie is attributed towards higher education. And in fact, in most cases, the higher education is more or less a shrinking piece of the pie in terms of percentage of payments towards higher education. And one of the reasons for that is kind of a changing perspective that higher education is a service that's provided, but also states are charging directly for this type of education. So thus lots of tuition increases that are going into the higher education sphere. The bulk of all of this education expenditures is going to be your elementary and secondary education. And there's a lot of kind of interesting discussions about how education expenditures and revenues are generated, and it's a piece that's very highly tied to property taxes in most states. And there has been many reforms that have gone on throughout the years in terms of both the revenue side of things and also the expenditure side of things. And it's an area that we can get into a little bit more of if you were more interested in, but we'll be talking more about the revenue side of things, because traditionally educational revenues are generated through property taxes, and thus lots of inequities stemmed from different jurisdictions being able to generate equal amounts of revenue from property taxes, especially places where there are very large dissimilarities in the value of properties. So there's been reform in Oregon that we'll talk more about. And then there's also on the expenditure side, how do we decide on how much to allocate to each school district? Are we doing it on a per student basis as we're doing it here in Oregon, with some adjustments for different types of different situations like low income or English as a second language or other types of special needs? Or is there some other better way to do this? So that's a separate discussion that's also kind of interesting, that's ongoing in a lot of different places around the country. All right, so you guys are going to be professional planners or have already worked in the planning field. So I wanted to kind of put this in the context of planning to kind of really set the stage for understanding what is the interaction between planning and public finance. So this figure that you see on screen here is a figure that comes from a 2005 Huddleston report from the Lincoln Institute that tries to really tie these two things together. And it categorizes planning activities into 7 different areas up here. So you have land use and zoning, development approval, public infrastructure revitalization, economic development, natural resource protection, and housing and community services. So I want you guys to take a moment to pause and think about where your interests lie in terms of these planning activities, and thinking about a specific policy or program that you're passionate or enthusiastic about, and think about how does this particular program or policy, how does it interact with the municipal budget or with public finance? And while you're thinking about it, it's possibly pretty straightforward for most of you guys to see that any policy, any program that you might think of in your head are going to necessarily have impacts in terms of money. You need money to actually implement a lot of the different programs. Whenever you change things in terms of zoning or development approvals or different policies that require different types of development or housing requirements, parking requirements, all of it affect how much money the government can get, and also how much money the government gets to spend on different types of programs. So this chart here, you can see that there's a couple of arrows and the whole bunch of things that are down here, all of these boxes kind of is conceptually presenting the fact that when you have changes to your planning activities, you are going to impact the types of developments that are going on, or the types of infrastructure that are built within your jurisdiction. And those are the things that are going to have property value impacts. Those are the things that are going to have revenue impacts on property taxes that are collected within the local government. It's going to have an impact on jobs, which is going to more heavily impact personal income taxes and corporate income taxes more at the state level. It's going to also impact spending, because if you are, say, starting a new program where you're expanding, say, the library system so that more people have access to lots of resources, that's going to require more money, and that money has to come from somewhere. And all of these things are intricately interlinked with each other, and it's impossible to think about any kind of planning activity without thinking about the revenue and the expenditure implications of that particular activity. One topic that's been a very widely discussed topic nowadays in Portland is how do we deal with homelessness, and thinking about all of the solutions to dealing with various aspects of homelessness, either from providing the short-term immediate services that people who don't have homes might require, to longer-term programs to ensure that fewer people become homeless or have extended bouts of chronic homelessness. All of those require different revenue streams and expenditure streams be dedicated to certain activities, and things take money. So lots of times we're talking about resources and how do we allocate resources, and what are the ways to generate new resources. So that's what all of this public finance is going to be about, is to think about what are the existing structures that are out there, what are new ones that can be explored within the given structure of your governmental system, and what do the expenditures then look like. And one of the things to keep in the back of your mind in terms of this whole framework is, what are the main functions of government? And according to Musgrave, who is one of your very famous public finance economists, Musgrave, he talked about three major functions of government. The first one being stabilization. So stabilization pretty much means that the government should have the role of providing a stable economy. And that is the one main function here that is more of a function that is attributed to the federal government in our particular system, where the Federal Reserve is in charge of controlling or stabilizing inflation as well as unemployment. So that's less of a function of the state and local government level. So the other two functions here, redistribution and allocation of resources, are going to be the things that we are going to be able to talk a bit about in our state and local government. Those are also functions of the federal government, but we also see it in the state and local level. So redistribution really has more to do with equity and making sure that people across the whole spectrum receive allocated resources. And that's going to be something that some parts of our state and local public finance system does take care of.